Big Sky Stearman has a new Stearman. We just finished rigging it. Let me show you how we rigged it on the Big Sky Stearman show. We have a good opportunity here to kind of explain some rigging challenges on the Stearman. We have a nice brand new airplane that we've put the wings on and leveled and now ready to rig the airplane. We use the original Boeing checklist. Comes out of their erection and maintenance manual. It's very concise, easy to follow, totally adequate, but there are some tricks. So what I've done is taken it out of the manual and highlighted it, and we'll just go step by step using this checklist as an example for the rigging procedures. I'd like to introduce some tools here that will be necessary to do this rigging. We're using the Holloway tensiometer for setting the tension on the wires. We have instructions here from Holloway on how to set the torque settings. We're using a torque wrench on this tensiometer off of this chart that's supplied by Holloway. That seems to be one of the tensiometers that everybody seems to be using. But you do need a tensiometer to measure the tensions of the wires. We can build a real simple quickie wire tightener. Do not use a crescent wrench. What Brent has done is just take a stick and cut a notch in it, and we use this to tighten and loosen the wires. First of all, the airplane is going to be need to be leveled for this, and we just make a simple board that reaches the tabs on the fuselage. You'll see them up front on the floor, on the structural members of the fuselage to level the airplane. And you, of course, will need a good, accurate, calibrated level for accuracy. And we have incidence boards here. After the airplane's pretty well rigged, we can set up an angle of incidence on the lower and the upper wings. We have one for the upper wing at 4 degrees, one for the bottom wing at 3 degrees. And so that puts angle of incidence in the wing. We want the wingtip to stall last. This keeps the aileron effective into the stall. The wing has a built-in angle to the airframe of 2 degrees. So that's about all there is in the way of tools to do this. Oh, and plumb bobs, just strings with bolts or nuts or something hanging on it for leveling purposes for measurements. Let's talk about the wires that hold this whole complex airplane together. We have flying wires which attach to the fuselage structure and then move up to the wing, the upper wing. We have a front set and a rear set. Those are called the flying wires. They're supporting the airplane, the wings in the air. Then we have the landing wires. They connect to the wing, lower wing, run up and connect to the center section. They hold the airplane wings in a static position on the ground, the landing wires. We have to apply correct tensions to all of those. Another tool that I didn't introduce to you is what's called the dihedral board. All of these are illustrated in the Boeing manual. They actually give you dimensions to create the incidence boards and the dihedral board. Dihedral, of course, adds stability to an airplane. So that's that upward angle that the wings have. The center section is the heart of the airplane. Everything starts there. It's got the fuel tank up above. It's got 4 struts. The wires that move the center section left and right are called roll wires, and they are diagonally across the airplane. We use them, tighten them or loosen them to move the center section left or right. The cabane wires move the center section fore and aft, which is the way we get our stagger. The upper wing lies ahead of the lower wing, and that's called stagger. There's a specific distance that we'll be checking. The light wire, a 5/16 thread as opposed to a 3/8 thread, this is called the cabane wire. And then the heavy wire is the anti-drag cabane wire. It's hard to understand, but when an airplane's flying through the air, the wings want to move forward. They don't drag, air drag doesn't push them back. They want to move forward and pull the airplane with them. So consequently, the wire that will resist the forces pulling the airplane forward are a little heavier. 3/8 thread as opposed to 5/16 thread.
That's cool.
Okay. There's a diagram here in the maintenance manual that shows wire tensions. These wires are all brought up to a very specific tension, and that gives the nomenclature, a description of the wire, and then it gives the size of the wire, and it gives a tensiometer reading with a minimum, a nominal, and a maximum tension. So we refer to this chart with the tensiometer to set tensions on all of these wires. Our first operation is to center the center section left and right. There's a specific distance for that. What we do is we hang a plumb bob. In this case, it's just an old worn out bolt, and it is hanging off of the center section, upper wing center section attach fitting. Make sure you can't do this in the wind because these blow all over the place. Okay, this particular measurement is taken off of this box structure right here on the fuselage to the string. There's a specific distance for that. It's listed in the maintenance manual, and you'll be using the roll wires to move the center section left and right so that it's the same number on each side. That centers the center section in place. So after the center section is centered left and right, the next job is to have all of our wires loosely in place. The only wire now that's holding the airplane together is the rear landing wire. It's holding the lower wing and the top wing. And what we're going to do now is we're going to set the dihedral of both lower wings first. So what we do is we take our dihedral board and we crank this rear landing wire, get some tension on it. All the other wires are floppy loose so that it will support the lower wings at the correct dihedral angle. This dihedral board is narrower at one end than at the other, and so when we put the level on this dihedral board, the wing will be going up at about 1.5 degrees dihedral. And so we set the lower wing to begin with, bearing only on the rear landing wire. The next check, after we've set the dihedral with the rear landing wire, we will do a squareness check. The wing is at one farther forward than the other side, and it's not square to the propeller hub. So we go out here and we draw a line all the way over here to the propeller hub. The manual says to the center of the crankshaft, and we note that distance. Then we do the same on the other side, and they have to be with 3/8 of an inch the same for a squareness check. The wings perpendicular with the fuselage. You're allowed a 3/8 difference there. I haven't very often had wings that are not square, perpendicular to the fuselage. Kind of a nightmare if they are, because now you got to go internally into the wing and check those drag and anti-drag wires, readjust them inside the wing, which is pretty much impossible. Now we're going to check the wing stagger. In a biplane, generally the upper wing lays forward of the lower wing. That's called stagger. A Beechcraft stagger wing is reversed. It has its own reasons. But for the most part, all biplanes, the upper wing will be forward of the lower wing. And what we've done now is we've dropped plumb bobs, again, a bolt on a string, pretty simple, off the leading edge of the upper wing, right in front of the interplane strut. And then we measure from the plumb bob over to the leading edge of the wing. And there's a specific distance for that. Some Stearman are still flying with what we call spoiler strips or stall strips, a little triangular piece of wood in the front of the leading edge of the wing. So there's two different dimensions there, and you would have to make sure you don't have spoiler strips, or you do have spoiler strips for the correct dimension. It's given in the instructions. So this stagger is established now again by the center section. We can pull the center section forward and it's going to move the upper wings forward also. And the way we do that is we tighten the cabane wire up here, and that's going to pull the center section forward. And be sure and leave slack on the anti-drag cabane wire. And we pull the center section forward, which in turn moves the wings forward to get the proper dimensions. If it's already got too much stagger, then we have to go back to the big anti-drag cabane wire and pull the wing back. But that manipulation is done here with the center section and the drag wires, cabane wires of the center section. Now that we know the wings are perpendicular to the airplane, the squareness check, we know that the center section is positioned left to right and is in the right position to create the stagger. We can now move to the main flying and landing wires for their final tensions. This is the rear landing wire, and what we do is we establish the dihedral with our dihedral board, but now we're going to crank up this wire about 6 or 7 half turns according to the manual. I've generally gone a couple more half turns in order. So that's the next thing to do, is to establish a larger angle of attack. We will then go to the 2 rear flying wires. They are a heavier wire than the front flying wires. You'll notice there's 2 running in parallel for strength. As we tighten these 2 parallel rear landing wires, it is now forcing the lower wing back down to its proper dihedral angle. So by doing that, we now have tension on the 2 rear flying wires and the correct tension on the rear landing wire. And we will use the tensiometer to double check that. One thing to understand is that there's a structural bridge, you might say, across the airplane. It follows this diagonal strut to the oversized rear flying wires, to the center section rear cabane wires where the main heavy wires are attached, then goes all the way across the airplane to the other side. So if you look down this line, it's kind of like a big bridge. That's where your structural strength is in this whole operation. Meanwhile, your front flying wires and your front landing wires can be manipulated to put, twist, or move the wings around. But the main strength is right across the airplane. While we were tuning the rear flying wires and the rear landing wire in order to establish correct dihedral, we left the front landing wire and the front flying wires hand snug. In order now to get tension on our front flying wires, we tighten the front landing wire, and it really cranks up. It's probably the tightest wire on the airplane. Tightening this to its prescribed torque sets the torque and tension on the front flying wires. We will double check that though according to the chart. All right, wires are all tight, everything's set, dihedral, stagger, squareness. Now we got to go to the wingtips of the airplane and put angles of incidence on the wingtips. So here's a board that's described in the manual. You could make one yourself. And we have a board for the upper wing and the lower wing. So we could start with the upper wing. I've only got one board here, but the upper wing board is 4 degrees, the lower wing board is 3 degrees. We'll position this lower wing board here on right at the interplane strut, first rib outboard of the interplane strut. And this then is at the angle established, and we put a level on the bottom of this board, and we want that at 0. We want that level, and this board is at 3 degrees, so it establishes an angle. And how we get that angle is we go to the rear strut, and there's a fitting attached to the rear strut that we use to lengthen or shorten that strut, which twists the wing. And that's how we set the angle of incidence. There are other options the manual describes. If that affected our stagger, then we can tweak front wires to get that stagger to come back where it's supposed to belong. So basically, the airplane now is rigged other than we have the aileron and the rigging of the controls. One of the final checks we need to do now are the angles of the controls, the empennage, the tail, and the aileron. The aileron's pretty simple. There's a tube that goes into the fuselage, and it has rod ends on the end of them, which can be adjusted. And it comes out through the wing with push-pull tubes and bell cranks, and we can adjust the angles of this aileron with those rod ends. So it's pretty simple measurement. You just raise your aileron to 6 1/8 inches and set your rod ends up and up, and that's all there is to the aileron. So the procedure for establishing the empennage at its correct angle is pretty simple also. The horizontal stabilizer has to be level. So we put a level across the two bearing hangers on the rear spar of the horizontal stabilizer, get it level. Then we make sure the vertical stabilizer is vertical up and down. And then we attach our wires. We have 2 wires on the bottom, 2 wires on top on each side. So they will be used then to, in their final tensioning and tightening, they will be used to establish a horizontal level position for the stabilizer and the vertical stabilizer. Again, the manual specifies some control distances here. When the rudder is lined up with the vertical stabilizer, you should be able to step back here visually and line it up with the reinforcement strap on top of the center section. And it's pretty easy. You can see if the vertical is tilted left or right by lining it up with the bar across the top of the center section. But a simple measurement again for measuring deflection of the rudder, as the book calls out, you could go from center position over 17 inches left or right. And so that's pretty simple. You adjust the turn barrels and the tension on the rudder cables and so on. The deflection on the elevator is 20, again the controls are locked, but it's 28 degrees up and 22 degrees down. You can adjust that by the big push-pull tube, or you go up to the stick and there's a little bolt with a stop nut on it that controls the length of that controls tube also. Well, here the Stearman's all pretty much rigged. It's a very straightforward rigging process, which is very well described in the maintenance manual, which is kind of a luxury. A lot of these old biplanes don't have that kind of information. The 17 and 18-year-old farm boys are maintaining these airplanes during World War II. The airplane is just a wonderfully designed, structurally strong, beautiful airplane. There's nothing like a Stearman. Thanks for watching the Big Sky Stearman Show. This airplane will be flying soon. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss it.